Hello, everybody, and welcome to Illuminating Dialogues number 7 with me, Jyoti, and very special guest, Dr. Stewart Arnold. How are you, Stewart?
I'm good, thanks, Jyoti. Great,
Good, good.
great to see you across the kilometres. I'm in Singapore. You're in Scotland.
Yeah, like the opposite side of the world, right? So
Yeah.
just to introduce Dr. Stewart, Dr. Stewart is a experienced facilitator, worked in management and consulting, and the higher education industry in Australia and Singapore. Dr. Stewart is skilled in action learning, executive coaching, and facilitating workshops from managing organizational change to leading people. And of course, my lecturer over 6 years ago on a very special class at Nanyang Technological University, Singapore, called Leadership in the 21st Century. So that was a very special class for me over 6 years ago. So it's amazing to catch up with you again. So just for the viewers again, where are you coming from in the world in Singapore? And also, what lights you up?
Firstly, I lived in Singapore for 17 years, and for about the last 12 of those,
Mm,
I was lucky enough to be given carte blanche, to be given free rein in designing my own course. I just had to use that title, Leadership in the 21st Century.
okay.
I don't know whether you remember, but I I wasn't particularly enamored with the title, particularly since I started it in 2010 and I was hoping to continue it well into the 21st century. And I wanted to call it Leadership for Real
Mm,
because the emphasis is on what we really need to do, leadership for real. But the powers that be said, it is leadership in the 21st century, full stop, amen.
mhm.
So, what I did, see if you remember, the course outline, the famous course outlines, which we all have to produce and we know students rarely look at, the course outline directly under the title had leadership for real. And I got to give my little spiel about how important I believed it was
Mm,
to learn some real skills, some real processes, some real techniques for leadership. So
mm.
I was never well, I never got in trouble for that. I was never hauled over the coals. So the official title was Leadership in the 21st Century, and I was able to run it my way with the emphasis on what will undergraduates and some postgraduates really need for any form of leadership beyond university.
Mm.
Your second question, what lights me up?
Yes.
Goodness, I thought you told me we had 45 minutes, not an hour and 45 minutes.
Well, if you're that passionate, I'm sure I'm sure we can find some gold in there.
Now, in a word, it's facilitation.
Okay.
So it is a term that I've put into my LinkedIn profile.
Mm,
And we did a little exercise on a team building sort of a day with the other profs at Nanyang Business School a few years ago. And we had to do a drawing that represented ourselves.
mm.
And as always, I did the world's worst drawing, uh, stick figures and arrows, and nobody knew what it meant. But I put FOA in the middle.
Mm,
You know, don't think dirty thoughts, but FOA was facilitator of action. Interesting. The power of that 10 or 15 minutes of doing this drawing, trying to capture who am I in the
mm,
same way you're asking me that question too. I came to that realization that that's really who I am at my core, a facilitator. And what I mean by facilitator is somebody who helps,
mm,
facilitates, who helps others to achieve their goals, to become the best version of themselves, and so on. So I think that's the core principle I work on, and it's something that excites me. Obviously, every person is different. The skills, the processes, the understanding to try and help or facilitate people to be better is varied in every situation. So I could do what I do for the next 5 centuries and never get bored.
Well, I hope you do live that long and manage to keep facilitating. And in many ways, no pressure for me because I'm basically facilitating this conversation. And that illuminating dialogues, why I've set this up, is to essentially facilitate a conversation in that it draws from the dialogue, the experience from both the guest and myself, and to journey in a dialogue, because in Greek it means flow of meaning, to a place where we can organically unfold an understanding and then illuminate for the viewers, for the listeners, and for ourselves, where both our realities come together and have that conversation. And so, yeah, I'm sure we can dig into the power of facilitation. What really is facilitation? What is real leadership as opposed to maybe another kind of teaching leadership? And of course, how can people incorporate that in a more self-leadership style? And we can talk about what does self-leadership mean. I know there's a lot of internet posts around that. And so we can unpack this conversation. And so people can get really an understanding of how they can use leadership in their own lives, but also if they're in a business setting or in a work setting, how can they use the experience you've had in their lives and in their daily lives as well. So, sounds good. So I'm thinking where we can start is really reflecting on leadership in the 21st century, or leadership for real class, as you termed it before. And really what made it so impactful, do you think, for students coming from a wide range of backgrounds, coming from a wide range of countries and also subject fields?
So by the time I started that course, in fact, by the time I started teaching at university, most universities paid lip service and many did more than that. Many do it very well. This idea of active learning or interactive learning or participative learning, because there's been research over 30 years or more that clearly shows that adults in particular, I think it probably applies to children as well, that humans in particular learn best through a variety of stimuli. So experiential, reading, talking, and not just sitting and listening. And that's, I guess we all know that now. That's quite straightforward. But that was what I was excited about. And so just before we came on air, we talked about that each class was 2 hours and 50 minutes and 13 classes across semester. How did we fill them up? Well, I filled them up with lots of short, sharp activities in which the students in the class did a lot of the talking and thinking. If you remember, people were put into teams. I deliberately made the teams as diverse as possible. You actually had to give peer ratings on each other at the end of the course, because there were some team activities that were accessible. But beyond the necessary evil of assessment, working in those groups, what I observed across 12 years is that people did generally become friends, become closer. Very few groups did not work. Most groups worked very well. Obviously, some people connect better than others. The wider one might drift away and miss a couple of weeks. But in general, being in a group that has to actually do activities, do discussions, do things related to leadership for real. And I showed videos and we had case studies and debates and quizzes and all manner of things. So to really get actively thinking, actively talking with others around you, I think was really powerful for people in the groups. Wonderful for me to watch, and then wonderful for me to debrief, because of course the discussion or the activity is not enough by itself. So after the 10 minutes or 15 minutes, I would arrow, that's the Singaporean term, if you remember, arrow a group, which means pick on a group, point a group out, say it's your turn. And then I left it up to the group who would speak on their behalf. I know that some of my colleagues believe in this idea of keeping a class on its toes by basically pointing and picking on anybody. I'm a firm believer in personality and the difference between introverts and extroverts. We do know a lot about that. And I think it's unfair on introverts to give them no warning and to put them in the spotlight. So I would believe that in a 5-person group, an introvert should contribute. And if you remember, I ran processes by which the team got to know each other better, got to know each other at a deeper level. And the nature of the activities and the discussions was such that really there's no excuse not to contribute. But when it came to then publishing to the rest of the class, predictably, there were these people like this Jotty guy and a few others who would always speak up on behalf of their group. And that's fine. You wanted to speak out loud. Others appreciated because you're articulate and you said what your group was saying, which is often what the other groups were saying as well. So I was fine with there ever only being perhaps 20% of the class that spoke up in front of the other 40 or more students, knowing that every member of the class was in fact talking, actively thinking, processing during the group activities. And also we did quite a few quite self-reflective activities. We did some pair work, we did role plays. So I used a whole mix of techniques. Again, never boring for me, with that aim of facilitating everybody in that class, regardless of so-called learning style and personality and all the things that educators argue about. Regardless of that, every person had the opportunity to learn something about themselves, about leadership, and about their fellow colleagues. Maybe you can help me out here, but I'm just fractionally disappointed that I've not yet heard of any of my ex-students getting married. I suspect it may have happened because I've taught enough and I know there was connections between some of them. I know one group, not in terms of marrying, but one group just got on so well. They were from everywhere. And one was from Japan, Korea, places. They had intended to meet up at the Tokyo Olympics.
Wow.
Got put off by a year. And then I think 4 of the 5 of them still got to the actual, there was no spectators at the Olympics then. But they did meet up in Japan anyway.
Wow.
So they've stayed in touch. They've stayed really good friends, and they may or may not have had some romantic relationship between 2 of them. I don't know.
Well, if anyone's watching this from the Leadership 21st Century class, feel free to get in touch.
Please tell me.
Please tell me.
I don't want a wedding invitation or anything. I just would be really, that would really make my day up.
Well, you can have a nice holiday to Scotland if that's the case. I think what you shared was really, really powerful, right? About facilitation, because on Friday, we'd invited Joyce Meng, who is a YouTuber and a personality coach in terms of Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, MBTI, Clifton Strengths. And we had her on. She was talking in depth about the difference between introverts, extroverts, the cognitive functions, judging, perceiving, etc. And so as a facilitator, I thought it was very nicely, as you said, that, okay, this guy was maybe speaking on behalf of the team, but this can actually be taken into the business world where that not necessarily every leader will be outgoing and will be talking in behalf of the group, but there are certain mental processes going on that is as intelligent as other certain mental processes, which may value speaking for the group. But other members in the class may have such insightful ideas and comments that they should be valued and they should be taken into account too. And I think that speaks to the power of the facilitator, drawing out that and noticing and not letting one voice, let's say, overpower another, or one mode of thinking overpower
Yeah.
another.
Yeah, I suspect there's a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And if any of your coaches listening, if you're coaching one-on-one, then the personality becomes important, and you do pitch your approach to that person because you're dealing with one person. And certainly any time I've done some workplace counseling and some coaching, it is important
Mm-hmm.
to get an understanding of that person as best as possible and then work with that. But the beauty of doing something with a larger group is that unless they're completely homogenous,
Mm-hmm.
those differences will exist. And it takes the pressure off. I obviously can't reach out to everybody where they're at, but I run processes that allow everybody at some point to, to be connected and then to connect with each other. So it's not just me pulling the strings. We have 40 facilitators in each class. And I mean, that's a pleasant thing for a facilitator who works with groups of more than 5, 40, 100, 200, organizational change, and so on, is that, yes, personality differences are important, but unless you have reason to suspect, and there are, I mean, accountants are typically ITSJ and so on. If you're dealing with a group of accountants, you might take a certain approach. But unless you have reason to believe there's homogeneity amongst the group, then I think you assume by default that we're dealing with a microcosm of the world at large, where people differ, and you use a whole bunch of tools from your toolkit to encourage and facilitate people to get the best out of each other.
Absolutely. And so just going back to that power of facilitation, if anyone's watching this who is a coach or who is a facilitator, I'm personally, I'm an engineer right now, but I'm doing people leadership development in my own workplace. We've done 2 pilots. We've done a live leadership workshop with about 12 or so people, and we're putting people into breakout rooms, and we're noticing there, exactly like leadership in the 21st century, some people are going to speak more, some people are going to speak less. But when we're actively putting people more into a turning off their camera and listening role, and we're facilitating a dialogue one-on-one, we're getting such a richness of conversation, we're getting such a depth of conversation, and the observer is actually able to observe so deeply than they would even if they were participating in that conversation. And I think that speaks to the power of a facilitator able to hold back, let people who otherwise wouldn't have spoken to speak.
Yep.
And so I'm just wondering, through your experience that you've had, and we can delve into self-leadership here and what that means. What is the mindset of a facilitator? How can they demonstrate self-leadership? And what are you bringing to the table as a facilitator?
Again, I see them perhaps as separate.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about self-leadership, and then we'll see if that integrates with what we've been saying about facilitation. When you and I first talked, I wasn't sure what you meant by self-leadership. It's a term that, and you're right, it's in at the moment. A lot is written about it. I would just say self-leadership is, well, let me start by saying my famous definition of leadership, of course, leadership in workplaces, in organizational settings. It's a process of influencing, ring a bell to you, behavior of people for some greater purpose. There's 3 or 4 parts to that. So it's a process, and it's about influencing, not about controlling, coercing, or demanding. And our focus is on behavior, certainly in the workplace. Spiritual leaders might wish to change your belief system. Emotional leaders, perhaps even professional counselors, might work on your emotions. But ultimately in the workplace, it's behavior that we look at, and it's behavior that determines whether your work is effective, whether you contribute to what the team or department is doing. And then I added to that, if you remember, I was always very proud. First part of that definition comes up in many books on leadership, things like guiding people towards organizational goals. But I added the part about for some greater purpose.
Yes.
And I did that 13 years ago. And it's like today, every second word we discuss, COP28's just finishing up. And, we are obviously looking at some fairly major purposes that we ought to be, or we should choose to serve and to work towards. So I never set out to define what greater purpose would mean. If you remember, I threw it over to participants in my class and said, it's really for you to think about what it is not in an organizational setting is improving the bottom line of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
It might be important, and most of us have got jobs that contribute to objectives and key performance indicators that contribute to team goals and departmental goals, which eventually contribute to the organization doing well. I was simply saying that let's look at what doing well means.
Yes.
Because it's not enough just to meet the bottom line. And we all know about sustainability and corporate sustainability and so on these days. So that's why that part is also important, that it's a process of influencing people, influencing their behavior towards some greater purpose. And it's a worthwhile thing, I guess, for each of us to stop and every now and then reflect on. Yes, I'm doing my job. Yes, I'm influencing people. Yes, I'm coaching. Yes, I'm teaching. Yes, I'm leading an organization. But ultimately, what's the purpose? Ultimately, where is this heading? And again, if you remember, I actually suggested that all of us should take stock of our careers every few years and say, is this really what I want to do? Is this really heading in the direction that I want to? My advice to undergraduates was always, you find yourself in a career, you get caught up, it's exciting, it's heady, you're making money, it's always good. You may even be climbing the career ladder. And at some point, your partner or your friends will say, you're working 100 hours a week. Yes, I know. It's just until we get this project done. I don't want to be one of those people who works 100 hours a week. 12 months later, a couple of those friends remain. You're still working 100 hours a week. Oh, I know. It is literally the rat race. It is really, really hard to get off. And that's why I think it's important to not make those excuses and to stop and say, well, what is this greater purpose that I'm heading for in my contribution to society and the world during my lifetime? I'm not going to get there tomorrow or even next year, but am I actually on the path to it? Or am I just killing time, making money, perhaps helping a family to grow, which is a worthwhile endeavor? But, what really is my contribution? And I know this is the sort of illuminating dialogues we throw up all the time.
Absolutely. I think it's such a key element that you touched on there. That phrase at the end, greater purpose. I think as a 20-year-old, leaving my home for the first time in Scotland as a third-year student, coming to Singapore studying biomedical engineering, and just choosing this class on a whim because it sounded good, and then going into the class and then being put with, leading towards a greater purpose. I'm like, what is a greater purpose here? And that class, I referenced that class as I later went on to internships in Hong Kong next that year. I shared some of the articles with some of my fellow interns from India, and they found it useful, like managing teams virtually, which then became more impactful because COVID happened later on. Ambi-culture approach. I remember we also talked about a guy from the South Airlines in America turning that company around. So all of these things in that class for our undergraduate, postgraduate really helped going forward in the future, though I didn't realize it at that time. And so I think what you touched on is really important. We like to define it as a rat race, but it's really a mode of thinking where we're having a very focused lens of awareness. And so what was really helpful about that class, facilitation and coaching in general, is going from the quantitative bottom line approach, which I talk about a lot in with our management, to more of a qualitative approach towards what is the greater purpose here. What is the intangible aspects here? Where are we moving towards in a non-linear trajectory? And I feel that conversation brings passion, it brings insight, and it brings people together. Because yes, the bottom line can bring people together, but I feel it has a very short-termism approach. And we can talk about the ambi-culture approach later on in the conversation and how that plays into it. But I feel this greater purpose has a much longer-term sustainability approach here. So I'm just wondering, again, if anything's coming up for you in terms of having this, conversation.
Can I ask you?
Yeah.
You said you were 20 at the time, and that was 6 years ago.
Yeah.
You know what I'm going to ask? What is your greater purpose?
This is I've thought about this a lot. I think my greater purpose is now to step into as a coach to help bring other people, to help empower people in their own lives. Actually, I've delved into MBTI a lot. I've watched a lot of Joyce's channel, who was on last episode, and delving into ENFJ. That's who I am as a personality type, and I hold that very loosely. But it's really to help others bring insight into their personality type, understand the patterns they're going through in their own lives, and to understand their skill sets and their behaviors, and really be an advocate or facilitator for people in their own lives. Now, I don't know what context that can play out in the future. Like you said, there's emotional leaders, there's counselor leaders, there's leadership leaders, but I'm stepping into that coaching role. This is the reason I've had this podcast to share with other people, to share with people in the community, to start my own YouTube channel, to share my own journey, and also to start my own coaching practice. So, that's kind of my own journey at the moment.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you didn't try and give me a lovely definition of my greater purpose is ...
No.
Because it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be easy to find. It is somewhat fluid, and it will change over time, and it has many parts to it. And you've described the sorts of things that have become important for you now, in the 6 years that you were in my class, and maybe across the next 60 years, you might veer away from them too, but they'll all be part of your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely something that unfolds as I go on. So I think we touched on it here, the fun and play elements and their importance. So, as a facilitator, just drawing on your experiences on the past, I'm also just curious. And we did that exercise, that T-shaped exercise, right? And I find that very powerful. And I see that playing out right now in the corporate world, where I'm sometimes got too much to do or not enough to do, as kind of that bottom line. The manager's always running about, and the executives, have a different story there. I won't dwell on that. So in a class, and certainly, outside of class, how is it important to have these fun and play elements? And what's the importance of that fun and play?
There's a wealth of evidence and experience from friends and family to tell us that if we enjoy life, then will live longer, and the years that we live longer are more enjoyable. What I would always say, remember I had a set of rules, which is a little unlike me, but a set of rules at the start of the class. And after we'd gone through the usual ones about turning off the mobile phone and paying attention to what people say, and doing the pre-reading before you come to class. The last one I said was have, and my drum roll, have what? People had no idea. I said have fun. 2 reasons. One is, if we're going to be here for nearly 3 hours, then we'll all be in a better mood walking out in 3 hours' time if we've had some fun during class. So there's no problem with having fun at the same time as you're learning. The second reason is that having fun helps learning. So having a positive mindset, having positive emotions coursing through your body, all those little neurohormones doing their thing, does actually help all those interconnections in the brain and does help learning. I remember hearing a long time ago, unfortunately it's not that practical, but if you were in the habit of studying, by studying I mean the good old-fashioned rote learning for an exam with a glass of wine, and there's some of us that operate like that, then ideally you would sit the exam with a glass of wine, because you basically tap into those same connections in your brain that were formed, and out would come your answers. The small problem there is we can't take glasses of wine into exams, but that principle is still, go into an exam with a smile and have a laugh. And I, back in the day when I used to design the hard copy exams, moved away from that now, but I would often put some fun element in the exam just so that students would read that, have a chuckle. They generally realised it was me that set the paper, and they think, oh yes. So any case study that I put in, and even some of the case studies we did in class, were based on real organisations, but I often gave them my own name just to be cute and interesting, and because of confidentiality, I couldn't talk about the actual organisation so much. But I think it's good to take that approach. I enjoyed it, and then I do believe that participants felt better about that too. And what I would always say at the start of the class is, I am not particularly funny myself. It's something I've come to realise. But again, I can facilitate, and I can certainly laugh. And so I would give permission to people like yourself. Please laugh, make jokes, ham it up a bit, within reason, but let's make this a vibrant class. And one of my own KPIs was how much noise we made each class.
Wow, I think that's a brilliant KPI. By the way, I would disagree. I think you're a very funny guy. But I think that KPI of how much noise or how much laughter, because we can be, like you said, like a few minutes ago, we can be so caught up in the bottom line and that quantitative approach that we just never factor in fun. We never factor in laughter of play, and that factors in that full picture about why we're doing this. What is the greater purpose here? And we just often forget. So I think that's the power of a facilitator, and that's the power of self-leadership. Because if you're leading yourself, and I'm going to be a bit loose here because I honestly feel with these terminologies, sometimes it can be a bit subjective, and we can aim to make them our own. And I think that's what makes them stronger, because when we get philosophies and ideas and when we embody them with our own essence, then we can start to use them more powerfully in the real world. So self-leadership for me is, I think, just having that approach where I'm able to give permission to myself. So I'm able to lead myself and integrate different parts of me. And like you said, you were able to give permission to the class. And so then I felt that I could turn up as a more engaging student. So was there anything else kind of, I want to like go a bit more on to the culture approach as well, and giving permission and integrating culture approaches. Is anything as a facilitator, you know, facilitating many, many different cultures, many students, many ages from Singapore and Australia, that helped you in integrating different cultural lenses? Okay.
Since we are now talking about self-leadership, um, I would agree with your approach. I think it's understanding yourself and then able to use that understanding again some great purpose to facilitate your own growth and development in whatever area. And so with self-leadership, and this, I think you mentioned this, I mean, it ties in with health and well-being, and
Mm.
fun is part of that. It ties in with what it is we might want from our career or our study. It ties in with what we would want from relationships, the impact that we have on others, what we're going to be remembered for. So all of that, quite holistic, I know, but all of that is really comes out of a better understanding of what sort of person I have and what I can do for myself to be able to be more fulfilled in those areas. So then that's the foundation, of course, at which you turn around, look at the rest of the world and say, how can I facilitate their leadership?
Mm.
And one of the points I made in the course was that this is not a course on leaders. You don't have to be a formal leader. Leadership is a process of influencing the behavior of others. And I find that quite freeing, really, because it, particularly, again, for undergraduates and when I first started out, you don't have to be at some managerial level. In fact, there's almost the opposite happens that as you climb the ladder and you become managerial, quite transactional, maybe you become a transformational leader further on, but you're not necessarily using leadership any more effectively than somebody who's new to the team and who comes into that team and is able to connect with people, facilitate them, help them clarify what it is they're trying to achieve, check in with the boss just to be sure you're doing the right thing and not getting yourself into trouble. But leadership shows up in so many different ways. It shows
Mm.
up in our family life, it shows up in our home life, it shows up in our relationship. So self leadership is the starting point, the understanding of what makes me tick,
Mm.
what skills, processes, tools do I have in order that I can serve some greater purpose. Why do I want to serve some greater purpose? Or selfish, because that actually gives me enjoyment, fulfillment. I'm no martyr. I don't think there's many real martyrs in this world. There are some. But the beauty of facilitating, the beauty of working towards a greater purpose is that amazing sense of fulfillment if we believe we've helped in any way. And helped in any way. I mean, this is what coaching is. You don't have to solve the person's problems. You don't have to turn them from a delivering message to the greatest CEO of all time. I mean, it's just you facilitate as much as they will allow some movement along a trajectory.
Mm. Yeah. Like like what you said there about leadership, not necessarily leading others, but more influencing others and managers. I think that was a key point. Like managers versus people who just came into the role can have the same level of influence, and that's seeping into the family and friends life. And I think it's inspiring as well for people watching this, people who are not necessarily in the business world, to
Mm,
understand, how can I lead
mm,
myself, how can I influence others. So do you have any
mm,
advice there about how can people start the process of self-leadership, and what is that mindset?
mm, mm. Okay, it's a cliche, but taking responsibility
Mm.
that regardless of my skill set or lack of skill set, I'm still in a position where I can find out more about myself. And then knowing more about myself, I can do things. So some of the terminology is enablers versus derailers. So what are my enablers? What are those things about me that help me to achieve my goals? And what are my derailers? What are the things that I tend to get sidetracked on or restrict or retard me my growth?
Mm.
One of the common ones I think of is how I respond to challenges. I
Mm.
think this is something on which people differ quite a lot. It's not really part of the big five personality factors. Maybe it ties in a bit. But am I the sort of person who jumps challenges or holds back? Now, I firmly believe that both are fine. If anything, I probably tend towards holds back.
Mm.
Problem is that if I'm the person who jumps at challenges and then just does that without thinking, it can become a derailer. If I'm the person that holds back and I hold back all the time and a great opportunity comes along and I miss it, then that has become a derailer. So your enablers can be your derailers. I know this runs the risk of going round and round,
Mm-hmm.
but the things that might fire you up and it might help you, if they're done too little or too much of, might end up being a derailer or a barrier, if you like, to utilizing those skills and those processes.
Mm.
So, and they just Google enablers and derailers or enablers and disablers, not quite the same thing. Uh, there are all sorts of little self questionnaires you can take. As always, and we did activities like this in class, getting feedback from others is often more powerful than staring at your own navel because humans are just notoriously bad at assessing ourselves
Mm.
and understanding ourselves. We just had this strong desire to think of it. Well, most people do. Most people have a strong desire to think of themselves in a positive light. Of course,
Yeah.
to the extent where we don't take on board feedback, we won't admit to any more mistakes and so on. It's part of the human condition. But if you really want to find out more about ourselves, then getting some trusted friends and asking for feedback in particular areas. So not just, can you tell me what sort of person I am? Am I a good person? Am I a bad? It's not going to work. This is where you possibly do need to use some tools. What did we use in class? This is something I got from the internet, where I encourage people. There's an online activity where you did this questionnaire yourself at first, and then you emailed it off to uh, 5 or 6 close friends, and anonymously they would report back. It's a 360-degree
Mm.
principle, but it's not just based on performance. It's based on
Your
well,
life.
you, you can set the parameters. Yeah, or
Mm.
what is it you want to know more about? How do I come across? That's an interesting one.
How do I come
We've talked
across?
about this quite a bit in the course. Yeah, the Johari window. What we know about
Mm.
ourselves that others don't. What others know about us that we don't. So yeah, finding a way to see how the rest of the world genuinely perceives us,
Okay.
and then taking that on board because that can be a bit scary. So this fun one, I used that as an example that many people believe they are funny, and most others would say no, they're not. Well, they wouldn't say it; they would think it.
Yeah.
Many people believe they're competent, or they can do this, or they can do that, or they're charismatic, or people have all sorts of self beliefs, and often those closest to them at work and even at home would say, no, it's really not the sort of person you are. And what's scary is, you and I, and most of the people watching, we're walking around without an accurate understanding of how we come across to others
Mm.
because people aren't going to tell us. Um, you
Exactly.
get some feedback, But
And
you know,
yeah, no, I was just going to add, like that point there, it speaks to the importance of going back to yourself first. Like you shared enablers, disablers, there's many tools, and people are walking around with not really a concept of sometimes what their strengths are. So like going back to that rat race, they they are maybe fixed in a certain position and chasing something, but then again they're not putting the mirror in front of them again, and they're saying, "Who am I? What do I want? What's the greater purpose here?" So it was really nice how you framed that. There were some tools, there's some ideas that people can take to go back and reflect on themselves, and that responsibility is that self leadership aspect. So once an individual has started to take responsibility, started to do self leadership, what's the actual effect on empathy and compassion? How does that flow outwards, do you find?
what's the famous expression? Unconscious, the four squares to
Unconscious incompetence. Yeah.
conscious incompetence. So that's the dangerous one, because you realize then that you're not what you thought you were. You realize you lack. So that's the uncomfortable one. So at that level, life's not so good. You're hoping to move to conscious competence. So at least being aware of what we're not doing well, maybe we can improve it, and then we will get to conscious competence. But the ideal is unconscious competence.
Mm.
So to move to the point where we are competent without even really having to think about it, because we've worked through it to get to that point. Okay,
Unconscious incompetence, right?
yeah,
So that's where
it's a bit heavy.
you think you can do something
Oh yeah, unconscious
better than you can.
unconscious incompetence is completely blur. Not aware of how the world sees you, not aware of your own
Right.
weaknesses. Now, again, most people that I think you deal with through illuminating dialogues at least going to be a conscious incompetence, and they're working towards conscious competence. And you've probably had some people who've reached nirvana, who've reached unconscious competence. And we'd all like to be like that, where you are very skilled at what you do,
Mm-hmm.
but you really don't even have to think about it.
Mm.
I wanted to talk about how to assess a related concept concept related to self leadership might be authentic leadership.
Mm.
So when I was given this course, Leadership in the 21st Century, I thought, great, I can throw out all those old situational theories, heedless contingency theories, all the textbooks that make no sense and pretty irrelevant anyway, and look for some new ones. And about the time I started, this new idea of authentic leadership
Mm.
emerged, and it's become very popular. So it was started by somebody called Bill George, an American, came from the corporate world. He's now an older gentleman, and but holds what they call senior professor position at Harvard. He's written a few books, one called True North, one and one where he talks about authentic leadership. So the essence of authentic leadership is self-awareness, understanding who you are, as we've just talked about. And then he goes on to say that authentic leaders are values driven. So again, they have a purpose, and this purpose translates to certain principles and certain values that they would uphold. And they'll do things in response to the value, not in response to somebody telling them they have to do this or pushing the panic button because our sales were down last quarter or something like that. They tend to be people of high integrity. He talks about effective leaders knowing knowing the value and deliberately cultivating. close relationships. So again, we covered this week.
I think if you come to the center a bit, sorry, Stuart, your microphone was cutting out a bit.
Yep. We talked about social support in the course, which is that if you have a small amount of really good friends with whom you can share quite freely, then that's very protective. Lots of research has shown that social support moderates, responses to stress and illness and all sorts of things. So in the same way, authentic leaders, although they're quite strong and are guided by their own principles, not by anybody else, part of that strength comes from the support they get underneath, if you like, the support they get from presumably family, but it doesn't have to be, can be friends, close friends, who know these people warts and all. And even though authentic leaders, by the term authentic, should be natural and genuine, there's a certain amount of leadership image comes in. I mean, you're not going to come to the executive boardroom in torn old shirt because that's what you prefer to wear. We still play the game to a certain extent. If you're at that boardroom and somebody's rattling on, saying things you don't agree with at all, you're not going to shout at them. You'll put on a smile and you'll try in some way to facilitate, to move the discussion, away. But when you get back home, or when you go for a walk after work with your best friend, you would then open up and say, that person, no names mentioned, that person just drives me crazy. It happens every time. I'm not quite sure what to do. There's value in that. There's nothing wrong with expressing negative emotion appropriately. And the best leaders do it appropriately. That's the key. You don't do it in the boardroom. You don't do it to the person who's causing problems. You need to pick your words very carefully with that person. But you can share the feelings you're experiencing as a result of that person or that situation. One of the key fundamentals of organizational change is that it hurts. It hurts like hell. And you can pretend it's not, but it is. It's really uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for the leaders. It's uncomfortable for the managers. It's terrible for the staff who are not sure if they're going to be let go or not. So being able to express those negative emotions in a reasonably constructive way. And I've come in, often consultants are brought in to try and help run debriefing workshops in a way, but it doesn't need to be an external. It just needs to be a focus on, it's all right, we're going through a tough time, we can admit that. If we have issues with each other, we can even admit them, but there needs to be some care taken in how we do that, because everybody's feeling fragile at the moment. So going and saying, you're not really helping, is not really helping. So that's why organizational change is so complicated.
I think you touched on a lot of key points there, like sharing a social support network. So even whether you're a doctor, whether you're an accountant, have a stressful day, whether you're in business, being a strong values-driven doctor, engineer, lawyer, that looks like the top of the iceberg, but you just have a whole iceberg under the water that supports you. So I feel people often don't think in that manner because, when the sales are plummeting and like you said, you want to change your tactic quickly, but if they're not aligned with your values, people might say, well, it doesn't matter if it's not aligned with my values. I'm still going to make this change and, increase the sales. But then people are forgetting that whole iceberg thinking approach, that more holistic thinking approach. And I feel like that's the power of a coach or a facilitator to come in and highlight that power. And I was also reminded of when you were talking about, being in the boardroom, we were talking to one of our directors, what is trust in change management? What is trust? That's one of the key bedrocks of relationship. And we were talking, and one of the directors said, It means like no matter what, you've got my back, I've got yours, no questions asked. And then I went home and I thought, well, yes, but I don't completely agree. I feel like it would go a level deeper. I feel like I follow Bernie Brown, who did a fantastic TED talk on the power of vulnerability. So I feel like, okay, where a situation can hold this in a private and confidential manner is where I can open up and be vulnerable to that person and say, can I trust you here? I can open up to you. I can be vulnerable here. This is my situation. I feel that is real trust because you're opening up and you're saying, can I trust you at this level? And then establishes a kind of bedrock relationship that goes beyond just the surface or medium term level of trust and establishes a deeper level of trust. So after that change management has occurred, after that storm has blown, there's now a deeper level of trust that has been formed.
Yes, yes. And what you're saying is, of course, very important for coaches, counsellors alike.
Mm.
They need to build a strong relationship, but more than that, it needs to be a trusting relationship. And again, there's a whole literature written on trust. It's not so straightforward as you think it is. And again, from the coaches or the counsellor's point of view, we may think we're trustworthy. I'm not going to tell anybody what you've told me. Look, I've got a nice warm smile. But the person on the other end comes with all sorts of issues, baggage. They have never been able to trust anybody before. If they're high up, well, of course they're worried about what they can say. So trust is a very challenging concept, but you're exactly right. I mean, if we all trusted each other, this would be a vastly different world. It's just that it's very hard to get there.
That's so true. Yeah, and where I wanted to go to next, I know that we're approaching an hour, so I hope you're okay for time. Was the concept of cultures, because I'm really with this channel, I'm really interested about, of course, delving into my own culture. I started this channel with the Punjabi lore series about humans coming into the subcontinent, the culture developing, my own grandparents coming from the UK, and that journey and my whole cultural process and exploring that. So I'm just wondering, as a leader, as a person, as someone developing and showcasing self-leadership, how can we integrate that ambicultural approach, as a facilitator? What has helped you there?
So we covered that in the course. Your year might have been the last year, because there's a nice Harvard Review article written called The Ambicultural Manager.
Mm-hmm.
And it's based on Stan Scher. I'm not even sure whether he's still alive. He's a Taiwanese tycoon, but heads up Acer. Well, he was the founder of Acer. He was the founder of Acer. I think he's pulled white back now. He's a few years as chairman of the board, but I suspect he's very old. But the article referred to the fact that he was ambicultural, like ambidextrous, able to work in a Chinese culture and an English culture, and it's what Taiwan does very well with their manufacturing, particularly of IT products, is that they do use the best of both worlds. Singapore, I haven't heard the term used here, but I think Singapore tries to be an ambicultural nation in the sense of it, like Switzerland, everybody's friend, and when here it's important to speak 2 or 3 different languages, so English and Chinese and Malay and Indian. So that's something be great if the world could move more towards, that our formal managers and leaders, but also our informal ones, that our formal managers and leaders, if they were to be ambicultural, that means have a good understanding of the expectations of different cultures. You're not always able to satisfy both cultures, but at least if you have a good understanding, then if you're going to suggest, hey team, we have to work very hard across this weekend to finish this project. A certain part of the team says it's departmentally this weekend. I have very strong obligations to my family, and I'm sorry, no amount of money you throw at me, I really can't. So if you have empathy towards that, then you would of course say, oh, my apologies, I should have realised. Project timeline can't be changed. What we'll need to do is try and bring somebody else in. I'd really appreciate your thoughts on somebody who could come in and help out a bit. And if there is any flexibility in your weekend, if you were able to stay back just for an hour before you head off on Friday and perhaps bring the new person in and tell them something from your own knowledge. So that's sort of an approach. Completely off the top of my head there, but that sort of approach where you recognize it and then you work with it.
Yeah.
You can't necessarily solve things because culture is a culture. We differ so much.
Yeah, I think. I think it really speaks to that. And in coaching, I was recently learning from Steve Chandler, which is one of the coaches in US. He had an audio piece called Expectations versus Agreements, where you're going around and you're not necessarily putting expectations on people, but you're trying to listen to some expectations and setting agreements. So I feel like that really speaks to the ambicultural approach, because I know we talked about guanxi in the class, which stuck with me all these years, and I definitely used that when I went to Hong Kong in the labs, because I know the professors had a lot of guanxi, and I wanted to respect that. What's your expectation there? I would like to go leave at this time. How can I accommodate this? What agreements can we put in place? I know other cultures are polychromatic. So when we were organizing hikes, a Polish girl, she would be down at 8:45 to go for the hike. The hike was at 9. I called my Indian friend at 9:15. Yeah, I'm coming. He was still in the shower, right? So what's the expectations here, and what agreements can we put in place to make sure that these expectations are understood? That the guanxi is held up, or the British politeness is seen to. So this ambiculture approach was such a nice piece in the class.
We had a case study, or an application activity, we called it, where as a group you had to plan an event, I think, and you had to do the time frame and so on. And what it showed up was that some people in the group thought of some things and some people didn't. And even the issue of, I think I said, you are the real people representing the real countries that you've come from, and going back there, that you have 3 weeks to prepare this event. And so you'll need a couple of virtual meetings, where the virtual work came in. And, some people realized that they needed to pick a time zone that was most suitable for everybody. Others forgot that completely. There's a lot of the quite specific details in working with people from a different culture came out of that. It's not so straightforward.
No.
But again, awareness is key.
Yeah, and that greater awareness, again, goes back to the start about the coach and the facilitator giving that greater purpose about, okay, here's the belief systems, or here's the sort of tracts people are going down. How can we look at that from a greater purpose standpoint? So that's really key. So as we begin to widen down, because I respect that you're on a Sunday on your holidays, so I respect you being here.
I'm just winding up now.
Maybe we can save that for another conversation.
I did want to say, let me say in finishing, my own journey has been a long, interesting one. But I did a stint of picking fruit in my 20s. And then I came back to university and in Brisbane, and I was doing psychology. And the best thing I did was to join Lifeline, the telephone counselling organisation. And it's almost a mantra there that you can't change people. You just provide a listening ear and help. I don't think they use the word facilitate, but facilitate their listening. So then I found that to be so powerful as a management consultant, to set up a consultancy with 2 others. And then when I got into university teaching later on, the same thing. And if you think about it, it's very straightforward. Again, goes against what we want to do as humans. What we want to do as humans is solve problems for people, help them as much as we can. You tell somebody what they should do, even if you buy things, set up appointments, really provide practical assistance for what they should do, they won't necessarily do it. In fact, most of the time they don't. I mean, doctors are only just waking up to this now. But a doctor tells you go and take this medication and that and stop doing this and stop doing that. No patients. Hardly any patients actually follow their doctor's advice. The whole thing's a joke because humans don't. The power of facilitation and the challenge and the skill is that you meet that person or that group where they're at. And then you're trying to find the best way that, this is what excites me, try to find the best way that will get them to move to where they want to move. And often it's a process. So, from a counselling point of view, they don't want to move anywhere at first. If they've just had a crisis or something major breakup, they want to emote. Your role is to listen, to help them to be emotional. At some other point, when they're ready to make some changes, you don't tell them what changes to make. It's never going to work. You set up the conditions for them to think about what changes they'll make. And that's the similar approach that is done in coaching.
Yeah, it's like kind of creating that environment condition. Like you have the plant, you're getting the sunlight and the soil and the rain.
Oh, yes.
So it's not a sort of hands-on approach, but it's a more... Yeah, sorry, you're going to add?
Just my last point, because you raised it earlier, the T group activity.
Oh, yeah.
It's a particular paper and pen experiential activity designed to show up what can go wrong in a team and across teams. And it does it quite powerfully. I've now added to that. I found a Harvard simulation case study, so it's a group, but the 2 of them work very well together. And I've been running full-day workshops for corporate organizations where we do both activities and we talk about what they mean. Having moved back to Australia this year, and I'm just doing a little bit of teaching, but not a great amount. I want to go back into consulting more, and I'm going to develop a workshop around those 2 activities from a consultant's point of view. What's the difference? When I provide the workshop as an educational tool, this is your experience, after you've done it, I got you to talk about what principles does it show, what did you learn from that? And there's some things of value. But to do it in the organization with intact teams, particularly if there are issues between these teams, then the debrief takes on so much more power. And I'll need far more facilitation skills. I need to revive the ones I had 20 years ago, because then we look at what happened in that activity is symptomatic of what actually happens in this office. So do you realize that? Do you see that? And then how can we go about changing that? So using those activities as a starting point for really investigating and exploring what's holding our team back, what's holding our department back, what's holding our division, what's holding our organization back. So that's my next big direction in life, and I'm very, very excited by that.
Amazing. I'm so excited for you. And it's kind of like a mirror, so it's hard to explain to sometimes the impact or the quantitative, measure of what does this bring. But it's kind of like a big mirror, and it puts up to the organization's face sometimes. But I wanted to just ask you, just to finish on, just as a human being, like you mentioned as well, you were in that counseling region when you just started in your 20s. Just what have you noticed over the years that's led to both just happiness and success in the classroom, in the boardroom, and just in family life?
For myself.
Mhm.
Yeah, good question. I think, again, knowing what's important for me. So I knew right from the start that I wanted to get married and have a family. And yet, strangely enough, I didn't get married until quite late in life and had my firstborn when I was quite old. Um, it's worked out. It's helped to keep me fit. I have to be to keep up with them. They're teenagers now. So, I've got lots of friends who chose not to have children. They have fulfilling lives. But for me, I was always going to choose that path. I've tried over the years to juggle consulting and teaching with some success at times. We've come full circle now, and I'm getting back into more consulting, and that excites me. I think both help each other. The consulting helped the teaching originally. I was always able to use real life examples. And then now the teaching, with my experience with thousands of students of different nationalities, I think will help with the consulting.
Awesome. And yeah, it's like last dialogue we spoke about how it's not just one kind of thing we sort of shoot for in life. It's a multiple factors that take our interest. It's so multifaceted. So I always like to end the sessions with a phrase that I use in my coaching that my sister actually came up with, which is go slow to go far. Because I believe that when someone goes slow, and they really reflect, and it spoke to our conversation today about the power of facilitation, both as a parent, as a family, as a friend in the business world, can help us go far. So, what is your advice for people listening to really go slow to go far?
What is my advice beyond that? I mean, that's very good advice in
Yeah,
itself. You want me to add to it?
yeah, just yeah, how can just based on the facilitation
Yeah.
understanding.
Keep in mind, we can't change people. We can only facilitate them to change for themselves.
Amazing, powerful words. So thank you so much, Stuart, for coming on. If people want to get into contact with you, if they want to learn about more consulting or facilitation, where can they reach out to you? Can they reach out to your LinkedIn?
LinkedIn's the best. Yeah, I still need to update it and make it look a bit more professional, but the basic details are there. And yep, that's the best way to contact me.
Sounds good. I'll put your LinkedIn then in the description box below so people can reach out to you. Thank you again. And thank you to everybody listening. Remember to like and subscribe. And I will see everybody next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jody.
Bye bye.